It's the land of the Bible, it's home to the lowest place on earth, and it's home to two groups of people with competing national identities. Today we're talking about the Holy Land. When I say the Holy Land, I'm referring to Israel and the Palestinian territories, the Westbank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. Geographically, these areas are inextricably linked, and they clearly form one land. The problem is that not everyone agrees on whose land it is. Many Israelis and supporters of Israel see all of this land as Israel, the ancient homeland of the Jewish people which was promised to them by God, while most Palestinians and their supporters see all of this land as Palestine, an Arab country which was stolen from them. And there are other people on both sides who believe that the most realistic thing is to divide this land into two countries, one Jewish and one Arab. But dividing this land is not an easy task, because a lot of people don't want to divide it, but also because this land is very small. At its widest point from the border with Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, it's only 115 kilometers wide. But if you only count Israel, not the West Bank, it's less than 15 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. In terms of culture and society, the Israelis in this area basically have a different country right on their doorstep. But there's not yet a sovereign Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, so it's not exactly a neighboring country. Aside from the Palestinians, Israel's neighbors include Lebanon to the north, Syria to the northeast, Jordan to the east, and Egypt to the southwest. Two of these countries, Egypt and Jordan, have peace agreements with Israel, while Lebanon and Syria are still technically at war with Israel. So what's all this division and war about? The State of Israel was established as a Jewish state in 1948, in part of what had been British Mandate Palestine, right in the center of the Arab world. This was the culmination of Zionism, a movement which encouraged Jews from around the world to return to their homeland after 2,000 years and create a new Jewish society there. There were always some Jews living there alongside the Arab population, but in the late 1800s, Jews from Europe began to arrive and establish a new community. This Jewish immigration, or aliyah, the Hebrew word meaning ascendance, accelerated when the land came under British control in 1920. The Arabs were not happy about this and felt the British were unfairly giving their land to the Jews. After much conflict between the Jews, Arabs, and British in Palestine, in 1947 the United Nations voted to partition Palestine into two separate states, one Jewish and one Arab. The British pulled out in 1948, and in the ensuing war, a Jewish state was established, while an Arab state was not. Jordan took hold of the West Bank, and Egypt took hold of Gaza. To Israelis, the creation of their state was the fulfillment of the Zionist dream to recreate a Jewish nation in the land of Israel. But to the Arabs of Palestine, this was an Nakba, the catastrophe. Hundreds of thousands of Palestine's Arab residents were displaced in the war and lost their homes, and were never allowed to return. After this war, Israel held 78% of the land that had been British-controlled Palestine, which now had a large Jewish majority. But in the War of 1967, Israel seized the remaining 22%, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, bringing a large Palestinian population under its control. Most countries in the world recognize Israel as a country within its pre-1967 borders, but consider Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem occupied territories. Israel wants to keep as much of that land as possible, so it's built many Israeli settlements there in order to shape the borders of Israel in any future peace agreement. As a result of the Oslo peace process, which seems to be on hold indefinitely, some parts of the territories are under full or partial Palestinian control, though without national sovereignty. But if we look at a map of all the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, we can see that there's no longer a clear border between the Israelis and the Palestinians. There are essentially two different societies, one Jewish and one Arab, living in close proximity to each other. Politically, this is all a source of much disagreement and conflict, but geographically, the Holy Land forms a single unit. If we include the Golan Heights, which Israel seized from Syria and annexed, the total area of the Holy Land is about 29,008 square kilometers. That's a little smaller than Belgium. But there's a stunning variety of landscapes and climate areas in this one little land. The Negev Desert in the south makes up almost half of the land. It's a rocky and mountainous desert that's contiguous with the Sinai Desert in Egypt. At the extreme southern tip of the Negev is the Gulf of Aqaba, which is part of the Red Sea. This is where the borders of Egypt, Israel, and Jordan almost converge. The southern part of the Negev is relatively warm in winter and blisteringly hot in summers, with high temperatures in Eilat averaging over 40 degrees Celsius. The eastern section of the Negev Desert consists of the Arava Valley, which forms a natural border with Jordan and extends 166 kilometers up to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is located at the lowest point on Earth, well, on land that is, and like Eilat, it's extremely arid and gets very hot in the summer. It's called the Dead Sea because most life can't survive in its extremely salty waters. North of the Dead Sea, the eastern border is marked by the Jordan River, which drains into the Dead Sea. According to the New Testament, Jesus baptized people in the Jordan River. The Jordan River runs through the Sea of Galilee in northeastern Israel. The Sea of Galilee is where Christians believe Jesus walked on water and performed other miracles, as well as where he gave his famous Sermon on the Mount. If you move westward from the Sea of Galilee, you enter the Galilee region, which consists of mainly rocky, hilly terrain. Lower Galilee is home to the city of Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. Further west, on the Mediterranean coast, is Haifa, Israel's third largest city and metro area. The Mediterranean coastal plain stretches from the Lebanese border down to the border with Egypt. Right in the middle of the coastal plain lies Tel Aviv, Israel's largest metropolitan area with around 4 million people. Tel Aviv was founded in 1909 as a Jewish city next to the Arab city of Jaffa, which dates back to the time of the Bible. Tel Aviv is a largely liberal, secular city, in contrast with the more conservative and religious city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the ancient capital of Israel described in the Bible. It's the holiest place in the world for Jews, especially the Western Wall, a remnant of the ancient Jewish temple. Right behind it is the Dome of the Rock, or Al-Aqsa Mosque, known as the third holiest site in Islam. Jerusalem is holy to Jews, Muslims, and Christians. The entire Old City of Jerusalem is full of archaeological treasures. But it's also a modern city of over 900,000 people. Around 61% of the population is Jewish, and around 38% of the population is Palestinian Arab, almost all of them living in East Jerusalem, the area of Jerusalem which Israel seized in the 1967 war. Israel claims all of Jerusalem as its united capital, while Palestinians insist that East Jerusalem, Al-Quds, is theirs and will be the capital of their future Palestinian state. In Jerusalem, winters get cold and there's occasional snowfall. This is partly because it sits high up in the Judean hills, which form the heartland of ancient Judea. The Judean hills extend south into the Westbank, including the town of Bethlehem, which is just to the south of Jerusalem. This is the town where Jesus is said to have been born. Today, it's a city under the control of the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian government in the West Bank, as are the other large Palestinian towns, including Hebron to the south. Actually, in Hebron, only 80% of the city is under the control of the Palestinian Authority, while the other 20% is controlled by the Israeli military. That 20% is basically a security zone set up around a number of Israeli settlements near the tomb of the patriarchs, where Abraham is traditionally thought to have been buried. Another Palestinian town is Jericho, one of the oldest cities in the world, with archaeological evidence of settlement as far back as 9000 BC. Then there's Nablus, a city originally built by the Romans near the ancient Israelite city of Shechem. This city is located in a valley between two mountains, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. Mount Gerizim is the holiest site of the Samaritans, a small community who consider their religion to be the original Israelite religion, in other words, the original form of Judaism. The Samaritans are the only people to have dual Israeli-Palestinian citizenship. In addition to the West Bank, there's also the Gaza Strip. Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, with 2.1 million people living in this narrow strip of land. 2/3 of the people are refugees from the lands that became Israel in 1948, and their descendants. Life in the Gaza Strip has always been rough, but especially since 2007 when Israel began blockading it and sometimes attacking it in rejection of its Hamas government. The Palestinian people are Arabs who speak Palestinian dialects of Arabic as their mother tongue. And of course, their official language used in formal contexts is Modern Standard Arabic, as in every Arab society. The vast majority of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are Muslim, around 99% overall, though it's closer to 98% in the West Bank. There are also Palestinians living inside Israel, who currently make up about 18% of Israel's citizens. They're sometimes referred to as Israeli Arabs. They speak Arabic as their native language, but they also learn Hebrew, the official language of Israel. Since the State of Israel is a Jewish state, the majority of its residents are Jewish at 73.9%, and 5% are other. What does other mean? Well, most of them are people with partial Jewish ancestry but don't have a Jewish mother, so according to the requirements of Orthodox Judaism, they're not Jewish unless they undergo a formal conversion. but they're still eligible to immigrate to Israel under the Law of Return. The Law of Return grants the right of Israeli citizenship to any Jew, anybody with a Jewish parent or grandparent, and the spouses of Jewish immigrants. The result of this law is that Israeli Jews come from a diverse variety of backgrounds, like Polish, Russian, Moroccan, Yemenite, Ethiopian, and so on. Modern Israeli culture developed from the merging of all the various Jewish diaspora cultures over decades of immigration, with some influence from Palestinian Arabic culture as well, especially on its food. Israelis might eat schnitzel and malawah, but they also love hummus and falafel as much as Palestinians do. So why have I referred to this land as the Holy Land throughout this video? Well, because it's a land of tremendous religious importance to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, but it's also because referring to Israel or referring to Palestine doesn't adequately reflect the fact that two different societies exist side by side here in one land: Israeli Jewish society and Palestinian Arab society. Geographically, this land is one unit, and even if there are two fully sovereign states in the future, the lives of Israelis and Palestinians will continue to be intertwined. Now over to you. If you're Israeli or Palestinian, what's something else you would like us to know about the Holy Land? Leave your comments down below. If you want to support this channel and to see videos from this channel 1 week early, consider becoming a channel member. Click the join button for more information. And check out this video on Lebanon, another Middle Eastern country just north of the Holy Land. I guarantee you'll learn something new about this fascinating country.